Bill, you keep making reference to New York City as though they're going to run out of water. And we also, on top of this, we have the issue of safe yields and actually what's used by New York City and what can be used. So in the middle of this thing, you've got this unspeakable water that's there that can't be used. And we keep referring to it as though they're going to run out of water, when in reality, they're not going to run out of water. Everybody who runs the Oasis the way it should be shows that there's a tremendous amount of water in there. Now how can, what we're doing is offering you an opportunity to give some water for things that are getting even worse. And yet you bring up that subject that they're going to run out of water. How can we do this to New York City? Why isn't this addressed? This has been put in your lap over and over and over again, and yet we never hear anything about it. It's just completely ignored.
I have an answer for that. My name is Chuck Schroeder. I'm with Grounding on the Delaware. Self-explanatory. A senior climatologist at Rutgers, I asked him about this shortage of water, this possibility that New York was going to run out of water. Specifically, the quote that came from a former director of DEP saying, the last day of the flood could be the first day of the next drought. And I asked Dr. Miller at Rutgers, what does that mean? He says, it means that they're managing the reservoirs on a drought paradigm. However, the problem with that is, we're not in a drought cycle. We're in a flood drought cycle. So they are managing their reservoirs with half a cycle in mind, and that's bad management. That's a senior scientist view, and more than one senior scientist view. You know, the flood victims here, and my website gets a lot of email. The flood victims here see this as a game. It's a game where New York City sits on one side of the table, and maybe the DRBC sits on that side of the table too. And the flood victims and the fishermen and the environmentalists, we sit on the other side of the table. All the cards are held by New York City. In addition, they hold the game book. They hold the rules. And they change them from time to time. And they don't tell us. And they don't explain them.
So they tell us how much to bet.
But nowhere tell us how much to bet. And the other frustrating and an interesting thing that happens is that there's a disagreement on New York City's side of the table. A representative from Pennsylvania says something like, well, full reservoirs have no impact on flooding. Governor Rendell writes a letter here saying they do. Lower those reservoirs, they're dangerous. They're putting our citizens in jeopardy. The climatologist says anyone who makes a statement like that instantly loses all of their credibility. Well, New York City's made that statement many, many times. So, interjecting, we've raised the flood issue here, and the reservoirs are now full, just as they were before that huge flood back in June 28, 06. Full. They will be spilling. If they're not spilling now, they'll be spilling by tomorrow. And we are scared. This game is going to blow up. The Times covers this now fairly aggressively, and they're working on it again. If the Times keeps hammering the DEP, and they have not been complimentary in the past, if the Times keeps hammering the DEP, the citizens of New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware are going to have a forum that's going to cause some major trouble. I got an email about a year and a half ago, from somebody I won't identify who said, our town was devastated, our house was devastated. Is there nothing to protect us from these criminals? Well, that's a strong word, isn't it? Criminals? I was told by a very good attorney that there's a firewall, a shield that protects public citizens from legal action. If this stuff continues, how thick is that firewall? And who is going to be held responsible for another flood, for another couple $100 million worth of damage, for more lives lost? Who's going to be held responsible?
The bottom line is,
Well,
there's
again,
about 100 million gallons a year that safely can be added to the release schedule without any impact on anybody And one of the problems that the fisheries people and the flood people are having a hard time understanding is what line of reasoning, how can you explain to them that that extra 100 million gallons that you know you're not going to be using every year can't be used? That's what they don't understand. I don't either.
That's actually a somewhat contentious topic of discussion. New York City, we don't have a problem, releasing water that we don't need right now, but we will need in the future. And what we have a problem with is creating programs, creating habitat, creating benefits now, and nobody does it, nobody except New York City does anything else in the future to pick up that program when we then need the water. So we need reliable partners to come up with some kind of programs that are sustainable. What you're talking about, we don't see as being a sustainable program.
New York City is authorized and will have 800 million gallons a year if they use it. But what I'm hearing says they're not being used, and as a result of that, we get sometimes, like last year, record low flows in the Delaware at Callicoon, all-time record lows, but the reservoir's almost full. Right now, the reservoirs are full, and these people are saying, hey, if a hurricane comes, we're going to get flooded out again. And they say, yeah, but gee, maybe this is not sustainable. And I think they're suggesting is neither is this current situation sustainable.
Asking our partners in the Decree Party to, let's agree on sustainability, and let's come up with some answers other than just relying on New York City's reservoirs.
Issues get muddled, and it's the foundation issue that you have to really think about. Here the foundation issue is this. You can't manage the river sensibly if you're not going to face reality. And the simple thing of reality is, give me a decent forecast of what you're going to use next year. And I have to say, folks, if New York City can, we can.
Right. It's continually being debated. And this is nothing to say about how the USGS does it. Whoever decided to do it these days was another example of how these negotiations get miscarried by a bunch of people who probably didn't know what they were doing. The projection of use in the original ERQs was supposed to be based on, in my interpretation, a reasonable last few years of use, with the expectation that New York's demand would continue to go up. It was all safe field based. The 7.25 billion gallons was a fudge factor in case there was a sudden leap in use. Now, when you come back and use the worst case year to project the next year's use, and then add on top of that another fudge factor, it doesn't make any sense at all. It's never made sense since the drought of the 60s, because no one is looking at it like a water supply engineer doing a safe yield analysis, which is what was done in the 50s. They haven't looked at this correctly since 1954.
The key in that discussion is safe yield. We need to have those discussions about yield, which are fundamental to any water supply system, any reservoir surface water system. You need basic understanding and discussion and the criteria that grow out of safe yield principles. And so we're all committed to, at least New Jersey's committed to pursuing that. And we certainly are hearing everyone loud and clear that we've got to figure out some way to get by this problem of, well, the city may use something in the that risk is properly placed where it belongs and not placed elsewhere. Adjourned.